While browsing awards for inspiration recently, I came across a site that won Site of the Day this month on August 7th. It had some really impressive animations, and the one that stood out to me right away was this full screen overlay menu. It combined several interactions in a really clean and fluid way. As you can see, when you move your cursor inside the overlay, the entire links container shifts horizontally. As the cursor approaches either side, the container adjusts its position, keeping the links accessible at all times. There is also this red highlighter bar at the bottom that slides between the hovered links. If you look closely, you can see it resizes dynamically based on the text width, which is really interesting. On top of that, the split text animation layered over the links gives the whole thing a refined high-end feel. I was really drawn to the way this menu worked, so I spent around 8 hours recreating it from scratch. The version I built includes all the key interactions from the original, the cursor tracking, dynamic highlighter, and character level animations. As I said, this one took longer to build than most of the recent projects, but I thought it was worth sharing how something like this can be built using JavaScript and GSAP. So in this video, I'll walk you through the entire project. It's fully responsive as well. Since mouse interactions aren't expected on mobile, I've disabled them and kept the layout clean and accessible for smaller screens. If you find my work helpful, leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you'd like to access the source code for this project, plus hundreds of other similar micro projects, and a brand new website template every month, you can check out the Pro membership via the link in the description. Alright, let's get into the code. Let's start by adding a simple navbar. It includes two paragraph elements, one on the left as the menu toggle and one on the right with some dummy text to mimic the original layout. Next, I'll add the menu overlay. Inside that, I'll drop in a div with the class name menu content. This is the section that holds the dummy copy you saw in the center of the overlay. I'm adding two columns inside, each filled with paragraph elements. Just placeholder text for now, like address details, contact info and social links. You can replace this later with whatever fits your project. Next, I'll add a div with the class menu image and place an image inside it. This is the small image that appears centered in the overlay when the menu is open. Then, I'll create a container for the nav links and call it menu links wrapper. Inside this wrapper, I'm adding 5 divs with the class menu link. Each one wraps an anchor tag that contains 2 span elements with the same text. We are using 2 spans because we'll animate them on hover. One will be visible by default and the second will slide up to replace it when hovered. After that, I'll add a div with the class link highlighter. We'll style it later with CSS and animate it to follow the hovered link. Finally, to make sure the page doesn't feel empty, I'm adding a main wrapper called container. This is where the rest of your website content would go. For now, I'm just placing a section inside it with a heading just to fill the space and keeping things balanced. That's it, the HTML structure is ready. Next, we'll move on to the styling. Let's start by importing fonts from Google Fonts, one for the body text and one for the headings and links. Next, I'll define a few CSS variables at the root, one for the dark background, one for the light background, and one accent color that we'll use for the highlighter bar. After that, I'll apply a quick reset to remove default margin and padding from all elements and set box sizing to border box to make layout control easier. For the body, I'm setting the font family to the one we imported and applying a black background. This will help with the fade out effect on the site content we added inside the container. Images are set to fully cover their containers without stretching. This ensures the center image stays sharp and clean regardless of screen size. For the heading style, I'm using uppercase text with the display font we imported earlier. It's bold and spaced tightly to give it presence. Paragraphs and anchor tags also use uppercase styling with a smaller size and slightly heavier weight. We'll use these for the labels, contact info, and links in the overlay. Next, I'll style the container. This holds the main content when the menu isn't open. We are giving it relative positioning and enabling transform and opacity optimizations. This will help when we animate it later with JavaScript when the menu opens. Then, I'll style the section inside the container. It takes up the full viewport, uses flexbox to center everything, and has a clean background and text color pulled from the variables we defined earlier. For the main heading inside the hero section, I am limiting its width a bit to avoid stretching too far on larger screens. Now I'll style the navigation bar. It's fixed to the top, spans the full width, and uses flexbox to space 2 elements across. The text color is set to light, and I'm using blend mode to make sure it stays visible against both light and dark backgrounds. Each paragraph inside the nav has a bit of padding and a pointer cursor. We'll hook that up to interactivity later. Next is the full screen menu overlay. It's fixed in place, covers the entire screen, and sits just below the nav in stacking order. We have disabled scrolling inside it and applied the dark background color with light text. We'll be animating the reveal of this overlay using clip path. That's why we are also enabling wheel change on it now for performance. Inside the overlay, I'm styling the content block. It's vertically centered, stretched across the width, and uses flexbox to space 2 columns. We'll animate this section vertically when the menu opens and closes. For the second column, I'm aligning the text to the right to match the visual layout from the reference. The image is placed in the center of the overlay using absolute positioning and transform. It's relatively small and optimized for scale and opacity transitions. We'll animate that too later on. Now I'll style the menu links wrapper. This is the horizontal rail of oversized links at the bottom of the menu. It's absolutely positioned, pushed to the bottom, and padded to give it room to breathe. We are enabling transform-based optimizations on this one as well, since we'll be moving it side to side using mouse tracking. Each menu link is wrapped in its own container, and we are hiding overflow so the animated span can slide in cleanly on hover. The anchor tags inside each link are styled using the display font we imported. They are extremely large, bold, and tightly spaced, just like the original site. Each anchor has 2 span elements stacked on top of each other. We'll animate between these two to create the split letter hover effect. The second span inside each anchor is absolutely positioned to overlap the first. By default, we'll move it out of the view with GSAP and then bring it in on hover. Next, I'll style the highlighter bar. It's positioned at the bottom, uses the accent color we defined earlier, and has fixed height and width values to start. We'll animate its position and width later using JavaScript based on the hover link. I am also setting the clip path on the menu overlay to hide it completely at first. This is the shape we'll animate when opening and closing the menu, expanding from the bottom to the top. For each animated character, I am applying relative positioning and transform optimizations. This helps when we animate individual letters inside the spans with split text. Finally, I'll add some basic responsive adjustments using a media query. On smaller screens, I'm reducing the font size for the hero heading and stretching it full width. The menu content moves slightly higher to fit the vertical space better. The center image and highlighter bar are hidden on small viewports since mouse interactions aren't expected there. The link rail stacks vertically and the font size is scaled down so everything still looks clean. That's it for the styling. Now we have got the full layout, structure and typography in place, and everything is ready to be animated with JavaScript. Before we walk through the JavaScript, just a quick note. As I mentioned earlier, this one took a lot of time to put together, so the codebase is a bit longer than usual. To save on editing time, I'll be pasting smaller blocks of code step by step rather than typing out everything. Since this project is on the heavier side, I've had to streamline things a bit on the editing side. That said, I'll still try to explain every part in detail so you will understand exactly what we are doing and how the whole thing works. If you are following along and want to write the code as you go, feel free to pause the video at any point. Alright, let's get into it. Let's start by importing GSAP and split text. GSAP will power all the animations, and split text is what we'll use later to break the link text into individual characters for the hover effect. Next, I'm wrapping everything inside a DOM content loaded event. This just ensures the entire HTML structure is fully loaded before we start selecting elements or triggering animations. Inside that, the first thing I'm doing is registering the split text plugin with GSAP. That step is required anytime you're using GSAP plugins. It just makes sure they are available inside the animation engine. Now, I'll start selecting all the key DOM elements that we'll be working with. First is the main container. This holds the rest of the page when the menu is closed. Then, I'm grabbing the menu toggle button from the top nav. That's the element we'll use to open and close the menu. After that, I'm selecting the full screen overlay. That's the entire menu panel that slides up from the bottom. Inside that, I am selecting the menu content block. This holds the text columns in the center of the screen. Then, I am grabbing the menu image. That's the small visual element that appears in the middle. Next, I am selecting the menu links wrapper. This is the horizontal rail at the bottom that holds all the big nav links. And finally, I am grabbing the link highlighter. That's the colored bar that slides under each link on hover. With all the elements selected, I'll now define a few variables to help us animate things smoothly. First, I'm setting two values, current X and target X. These will control the horizontal movement of the entire link wrapper. We'll use a simple interpolation between these values to make the menu follow the cursor smoothly. Then, I'm setting up similar values for the highlighter, current highlighter X, target highlighter X, and their widths. These will control both the position and the width of the highlight bar as it moves between links. After that, I am defining two boolean flags, is menu open and is menu animating. We'll use this to track the state of the menu so we know whether it's opened or closed and whether an animation is already running. That wraps up the setup and state variables. Next, I'm going to split the link text into individual characters so we can animate each letter during hover. First, I'm selecting all the anchor tags inside the menu link elements. This gives us access to each link in the menu. Then, I'm looping through every link. Inside each link, we already have two span elements, both containing the same text. One is the visible copy and the other is used for the hover effect. I am selecting both spans and looping through them. For each one, I am creating a new split text instance. This breaks the span into separate character elements, wrapping each individual letter in its own span tag. Once that's done, I'll loop through all the generated characters and add a class called character. We'll use that class to target and animate them later. Now for the second span, the one will reveal on hover. I am setting its character to start slightly below view using a vertical transform. This makes sure they are hidden initially and ready to animate upward when the link is hovered. So at this point, each menu link has two layers of characters. The top one is visible by default and the bottom one is moved down out of view. Later on, we'll animate between these two to create that smooth letter swap effect. Now I'll set some initial animation states for the rest of the elements in the overlay. First, I'm pushing the menu content block slightly downward and lowering its opacity. This is the center text inside the overlay and will animate it upward when the menu opens. Next, I'm scaling down the menu image and reducing its opacity. We'll scale it back up as the part of the open transition. After that, I'm moving all the links inside the menu links wrapper downward off the screen. They'll slide up into place during the reveal. I'm also hiding the highlighter bar by shifting it down. We'll animate it into place once the links appear. Now I'll set the default position and width for the highlighter so it lines up with the first link. I am selecting the first visible span inside the first menu link and measuring its width. That value is applied directly to the highlighter bar's width so it matches the link text exactly. I am also storing that value into two variables, current highlighter width and target highlighter width. We'll use those later when animating the width smoothly. Next, I'll calculate the initial horizontal position of the highlighter. To do that, I get the position of the first menu link and subtract the left position of the entire menu links wrapper. That gives us the exact offset needed to align the highlighter directly beneath the first link. I store that offset in both the current and target X position variables again so we can animate it smoothly later as the user hovers between links. So by now, all the elements inside the menu are prepared, characters are split and positioned, content is faded down, and the highlighter is ready to animate once the menu is opened. Next, we'll move on to building actual open and close logic for the menu toggle. So I'm creating a function called toggle menu and I attach it to the nav toggle button. The first thing I do inside the function is check whether an animation is already running. If it is, we just return early and ignore the click. This prevents any weird behavior caused by double clicking too fast while the animation is still in progress. Then I set a flag to mark that animation is started. Next, I check if the menu is currently open. If it's not open, we begin the open sequence. The first thing I animate is the main page container. I am pushing it upwards and reducing the opacity. This creates that subtle fade and shift effect behind the menu, so the page content feels like it's being pushed into the background. Then I animate the menu overlay. I am using a clip art transition to slide the entire panel upward, revealing it from the bottom of the screen. Once that animation finishes, I use the onComplete callback to do two things. I reset the container's transform so it's sitting slightly lower. That way, we can close it cleanly later. And I also set overflow on each menu link to visible so that the animated characters inside each span aren't clipped when the menu closes. Then I mark the menu is open and reset the animation flag so the toggle can be used again. After that, I animate the inner content, the text block in the middle of the overlay. I'm moving it back into place and fading it in. Next, I bring the center image to full scale and full opacity so it grows into place smoothly. Then I animate the link group. All the menu links are moved upward from below the screen. I'm using a staggered animation here, so each link comes in one after the other, so the image and the content appear first. Finally, I reveal the highlighter bar by bringing its Y position back to 0, so that's the full open sequence. Page fades out, overlay slides in, content appears, image scales in, links light up, and the highlighter drops into place. Now for the close sequence, if the menu is already open, when we click, we reverse everything. I start by bringing the page container back to its original position and resetting its opacity. Then I animate all the menu links out by sliding them upward off screen. Next, I move the content block upward and fade it back out. I also shift the center image upward and drops its opacity slightly. Then I collapse the menu overlay using the clip path. This pulls the entire panel back up to the top and hides it completely. Once the close animation finishes, I reset all the elements to their original states. The menu overlay's clip path is set back to its hidden state. All the links are moved back down. The highlighter is hidden again. The content block and image are faded and shifted just like at the start. I am also resetting overflow on each menu link so the link text can animate in with mask the next time they come in. And I reset the horizontal scroll for the entire link trail, both the current and target X values, so that the position doesn't carry over when reopening. Lastly, I update the menu state flags. The menu is marked as closed and the animation flag is cleared so we can open it again. At the very end, I attach this function to the nav toggle button, so anytime the user clicks on the menu label in the top nav, it triggers the open or close animation. That wraps up the full toggle logic. Next, we'll move on to handling the character animations on hover. I am starting by selecting all the menu link containers. These are the individual link blocks inside the horizontal nav trail. Then I'm looping through each link and attaching two event listeners, one for when the user hovers in and one for when they hover out. Inside the mouse enter event, I'm first checking if the screen width is smaller than a certain size, in this case less than 1000 pixels. If it's on mobile, we skip the animation entirely. If the screen is wide enough, we move forward with the animation. Each link has two span elements inside its anchor tag. One is the visible copy and the other is animated version that slides up during hover. I am grabbing both of those spans. Next, I am selecting all the characters inside the visible one. Now I am animating those visible characters, moving them upward and out of view. This is done using GSAP's to method. I am shifting them vertically, staggering the animation slightly across the letters and easing the transition to keep it smooth and fluid. Right after that, I am selecting all the characters inside the second span. This is the animated copy that was initially hidden below, and I animate those characters upward into place so they line up where the top layer used to be. So the effect here is a full character by character swap. The top letters slide up and out, while the second set slides in from below, giving the illusion of a typeface that resets itself on hover. Now for the mouse leave event, I am doing the exact opposite. Again, I check the screen width and exit if we are on mobile. Then I grab both span copies. Just like before, I animate the characters from the second span downward, taking them back out of view. At the same time, I bring the first span, the visible copy, back into its original position, letter by letter. So the animation reverses cleanly when you hover off the link. Because the effect is done at the character level, the whole thing feels really sharp and tactile. That completes the hover letter animation. Next, we'll set up the logic to move the entire link trail left and right based on the cursor position. I am starting by listening to mouse movement over the menu overlay. This is the full screen menu that appears when the user clicks the toggle. First, I check the screen width. If the viewport is smaller than 1000 pixels, I return early because on mobile, we are not expecting mouse movement and the whole interaction is disabled anyway. Now, if we are on desktop, I continue. I get the horizontal position of the mouse using the client X value from the mouse event. Then I store the full width of the viewport and also measure the total width of the menu links wrapper. That's the entire rail of nav links. Using those two values, I define a left and right limit, the minimum and maximum amount that the link rail is allowed to move. Basically, it can move between 0 and the difference between the viewport width and the full width of the linked container. Then I define a sensitivity zone. This is the horizontal range where the mouse will automatically cause movement. I am setting that to 50% of the total screen width, so only the center half of the screen will actually control the drift. Next, I calculate the start and end points of that range, so I know where the active zone begins and ends based on the current viewport size. Now, I'll figure out how far the mouse is inside that zone. If the cursor is outside the left boundary, I clamp the value to 0. If the cursor is beyond the right boundary, I clamp it to 1. If the mouse is somewhere inside the sensitivity zone, I calculate its percentage. So for example, if it's exactly halfway, we get a value of 0.5. That percentage value is then mapped to a new target X position for the link wrapper. It's multiplied by the total movable range, so the container drifts gently from left to right as you move your cursor across the center of the screen. Now I'll set up the logic for the highlighter bar so it follows the hover link in real time. For that, I'm looping through each menu link container. On mouse enter, I again check the screen width and skip the animation on mobile. Then I measure the distance from the hover link to the edge of the menu links wrapper. That gives me the exact X position where the highlighter needs to move. I store that value in the target highlighter X variable. Next, I measure the width of the hover link. To do that, I select the first span inside the anchor. That gives me the actual text element we want to match. Once I have its width, I store it in target highlighter width. Both the position and width values are updated smoothly in a request animation loop, so the bar glides to the hover link and resizes itself perfectly to match the text. This makes the entire nav feel more dynamic and interactive, even though we are using very simple math under the hood. Next, I'll show you how we reset the highlighter if the user moves their mouse away from the links completely. I am listening for a mouse leave event on the entire menu links wrapper. This means whenever the user's cursor exits the area that holds the nav links, we'll move the highlighter bar back to its original position. Inside the event, I am selecting the first menu link and grabbing its span, the visible link text. I calculate the horizontal offset of this link relative to the wrapper, just like we did before, and store the value in target highlighter X. Then I measure the width of the same link and store it in target highlighter width. So now the highlighter bar snaps back to the default position and size, giving the menu a clear resting state. Next, I'll set up the animation loop that makes everything feel smooth and responsive. I am creating a function called animate. Inside the function, I use a simple linear interpolation to gradually move the values toward their targets. First, I update the X position of the entire menu link wrapper. We already calculated target X earlier using mouse movement. Now we are moving current X closer to that target value on every frame. Next, I do the same thing for the highlight bar. I update both X position and its width using the same interpolation logic. This creates that soft easing effect as the menu responds to the cursor. Then I use GSAP to apply the new transform values. The menu wrapper is shifted left and right using the updated X value, and the highlighter is moved and resized to match whichever link is active. The animation duration is short, and I'm using a power easing curve for a snappy but smooth feel. Finally, I call request animation frame and pass in the same animate function. This creates a self-running loop that updates everything on every frame. And I call the animate function once at the very end to kick off the loop. That completes the interactive logic for the menu. The menu now opens and closes smoothly. The nav links animate letter by letter on hover. The highlight bar tracks your cursor, and the entire link rail shifts dynamically as you move your mouse. All of it is powered with just GSAP and a bit of math. Hope you found the video helpful. See you in the next one.